I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Ethel Brooks, Professor of Women's and Gender Studies and Sociology at Rutgers, hopefully I got it right, University. Ethel has flown all the way from the US to be with us here today. Hopefully her journey was less eventful than the last time. She will tell us more about how the rights of Roma were stripped away in the lead up to genocide. Ethel, please.
Thank you, Rudolph, for that lovely introduction. And thanks so much to the Lord Mayor and to Pavi Point for having me here today. It's a real honor. Yes, and my arrival this time was much nicer. The border guard actually said, well, it's really important that we commemorate the Roma Holocaust and we celebrate travel and Roma culture. So there's been a difference over the last few years, which is good. Yes, so good morning, everybody. It is an honor to be with you today as we mark the 80th anniversary of the Roma Holocaust. 80 years ago, on the 2nd of August, 1944, 2,897 Roma and Sinti people were murdered in the gas chambers of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Diaven. I come before you as a Romani woman belonging to a Romani community. For us, Roma, Sinti, travelers, home is family, our ancestors and our descendants, the network of mothers, fathers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, sisters, brothers, cousins, and children who make up our sense of who we are. Home is the stories we tell, and it's the belonging and the community that we build. Home is in this room as we come together today. 80 years ago, that home was broken. And I'm standing here in front of you to come together to reclaim the people and the communities and to bring together the history of both the broken to make us whole together today. So my presentation will begin with a letter to Amélie Baumann-Bloch, who was murdered in Auschwitz on June 26, 1944. Amélie Baumann-Bloch was born in 1910, and she was imprisoned in Maxglan, Salzburg, so she was born in Vienna. She was the partner of Matthias Krems, who died at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and the mother of Agatha, Anna, Ernst, and Frieda, who also were murdered at Auschwitz-Birkenau. She was deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau on April 3rd, 1943. She died, as I said, on June 26th, 1944. Dearest Amélie, in our language, your name can mean friend. I want to call you by your name, in all its syllables and in all its richness and in its beauty, in its truth. Amélie Baumann-Bloch. Amari Amélie, our ancestor, our sister, our aunt, our cousin, our grandmother, our beloved. Amélie, mother of Agatha, of Anna, of Ernst, of Frieda. Amélie, partner of Matthias. Amélie, daughter of, granddaughter of. So much was lost when they took your life, the future certainly, but also history. Family lines, so important for grounding ourselves, for who we are, as we are tied to no land. Who we are, who are known by our families, our histories, and our relations. You are Amari, ours, and you are mine. I write this letter today to you, more than 100 years after your birth, and 80 years after your death. I write to you to remember you, to write you into history, into story, and into family, outside of the archives of the perpetrators and murderers. I write to you to claim you as my own, as my everyday, as my treasure, and as my person. The next time someone asks me about my people, you and your family, your partner, your children, will be claimed by name. I will say your name so that your memories remain. I will bring you flowers with each utterance. This is my act of remembrance, of bringing together, of gathering that which has been lost, an act of family and an act of familiarity, of love. And in this love, I will say your name. I will tell stories of Vienna, and yes, of Maxklan, of Salzburg, and of Auschwitz-Birkenau. To my own children, Charlotte and Sada, to my cousins, to my grandchildren, and to the world. Your memory will be present, in the singing of the birds and in the flow of the rivers, the lakes and the seas. It is with me today, in New Jersey, in Dublin, with all of us, and I will bring it to my family, to our cemetery, to everywhere I go, and in everything I do. With all of my love, always, your Ethel. This is resistance. Amelie's history, her future, her family were taken from her and from us. There is no other trace of history and memorialization for Roma and Sinti, because it was such a long time coming. Recognition of the losses faced by our community, only given after decades of protest, of hunger strikes, of petitions by survivors and their families. It wasn't until October 2012 in Berlin that the memorial for murdered Roma and Sinti under National Socialism was dedicated. The memorial came 30 years after Germany officially recognized the racially based motives for the annihilation of Roma and Sinti. As we know here, we see in Ireland in 2017, traveler ethnicity was recognized. We also see in the last year that we have the actual work of bringing together policies that will ensure the inclusion and the anti-discrimination and to push back against racism against travelers and Roma. We have to understand that none of this comes without struggle, without protest, and without speaking up. As Romani Rose said, who a Sinti activist who lost 13 members of his family in Auschwitz-Birkenau, there is not a single member, a single family of the Sinti and Roma community in Germany who have not lost immediate family members. It shapes her identity to this day, end quote. And again, we can see this in all of our family members and in the ways in which persecution and a slow-moving, sometimes a fast-moving genocide has marked our existence in this world. 3/4 of the Roma and Sinti population in Europe were murdered during the Holocaust. And in some areas, such as in the Czech Republic and in parts of Poland, the Romani population was decimated. Today, across Europe, the 2nd of August is recognized as Roma Holocaust Memorial Day. We commemorate together today in Dublin, and since 2010, Dike na Bister has brought together youth, Roma and non-Roma, in Auschwitz to commemorate those who were murdered on the 2nd of August. The persecution of Roma and Sinti predated the Nazi era and continued afterwards, with historiographic evidence of pogroms, of harassment, and of genocide reaching as far back into the Middle Ages and going into the 19th century. As we know, those kinds of persecution and harassment continue to this day. Leading up to the Holocaust, under Article 109 of the Weimar Constitution, Roma and Sinti were accorded full and equal citizenship rights. That lasted for less than 20 years. Because by 1926, Bavaria required registration of all Sinti and Roma and instituted measures for combating gypsies, vagabonds, and the work shy. And by 1936, the Central Office for Combating the Gypsy Nuisance opened in Munich. The Interior Ministry setting up directives authorizing police to conduct raids on Romani families in preparation for the Berlin Olympics. That same year, Roma and Sinti became subject to the Nuremberg race laws, and many Roma who came under scrutiny of the state were forcibly sterilized. The first concentration camp for Sinti and Roma was established in Marzahn on the outskirts of Berlin on July 16, 1936. And I have to say that was one of the first concentration camps actually set up within Germany, specifically for Roma and Sinti. Directly after, local municipalities established concentration camps across Germany, set up by the Nazis and their allies as they moved throughout Europe. Romani and Sinti experiences of life before the Holocaust were marked by identity cards with anthropomorphic measurements and racial categorizations, roundups, and internments. While concentration camps are the best documented sites of wartime atrocity by the Nazis and their allies, their prisoners were tortured, worked to death, gassed, and murdered by other means. They are just one facet of the larger genocidal project of the Holocaust in Europe. Approximately 20,000 concentration camps were set up, and along with concentration camps that imprisoned millions, ghettos were set up in major cities, set apart by brick walls, barbed wire, and armed guards, housing Jews, Roma and Sinti, and others. In Poland, the Czech Republic, and beyond, German troops and police murdered countless Roma and Sinti, who were buried in mass graves in the countryside. When we look through the whole history of Roma deported to Transnistria in Romania, of Roma and Sinti perishing in camps, in unmarked graves, we have to understand that it's only part of the story. The mass graves have not fully been excavated, and the identification of those buried in them is still being carried out across Europe to this day. So there's still so much work to be done. And when we say that there were 500,000 people who were murdered, we have to understand that that could be just a part of the larger story. So we have no accurate account of the Romani and Sinti lives lost during the Holocaust. But we have to understand that it's imperative that we continue to remember and we continue to commemorate. I believe that it's crucial to hold memorial ceremonies and set aside spaces and monuments for those who were murdered, to those who lost family, loved ones, and community, and to those who returned from the camps, finding their camps or hiding, only to find their cultures and life worlds destroyed, to those who survived genocide. We must also recognize the kind of resistance that was carried out by Roma and Sinti to the terror and destruction of the Nazis and their allies. Of course, one of the most significant and understudied was the active resistance carried out by Roma and Sinti prisoners that occurred on the 15th to 16th of May, 1944, in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Over the course of the time in Auschwitz-Birkenau, at least 23,000 were murdered. Roma and Sinti people were murdered in the gas chambers there. And this kind of murder was systematic. And yet, in May 1944, the prisoners who remained in the Zigeunerlager, the Roma camp, discovered that the Nazis planned to gas all 6,000 of those who remained. When SS guards came armed with guns, they surrounded the camp for transport to the gas chambers, and they met, quote, with armed resistance. After stealing scraps of sheet metal, the prisoners had sharpened the metal into crudely fashioned knives. With these improvised weapons, with iron pipes, clubs, and stones, they defended themselves, and the guards shot some of the resistors. This resistance wasn't limited to the 16th of May, 1944. Even as on August 2nd, the SS guards came in to Auschwitz-Birkenau to carry out the murder of nearly 3,000 people. People resisted, they stood up. As community members, as scholars, and as policymakers, we have to remember those who died, and we have to recall those who resisted. It is important for us to record, to analyze, and to publish the numbers, the story, the data, and historical facts pertaining to the persecution and genocide of Roma and Sinti, much of which still remains undocumented. And we have to tell these the stories of resistance, of struggle, of heroes and heroines, and we have to think through what it means for us in this current moment to both recall and resist. Today, as we commemorate all those murdered by the Nazi and their allies, we recognize and pay tribute to the survivors and their families. We tell the stories of those who resisted. It's time for the world to listen to our histories, to our stories, as part of the history of Europe, as part of the history of the world, as part of the history of the Holocaust. This recognition, I would argue, includes continuously fighting against discrimination, persecution, racial and ethnic violence, which unfortunately travelers, Roma and Sinti, continue to suffer to this day, even now, 80 years after the Holocaust. Just this past August, 3 Romani boys in Serbia were kidnapped, racially abused, and tortured. Tortured. Our communities continue to suffer segregation, to be denied schooling, to be subject to violence by the state and by their neighbors alike. This must stop. You've referenced the riots in Dublin that happened last year, and I've seen the reverberations over the course of the years I've been following in the news. This must stop. We must also build solidarity with those who are subject to genocide in the current moment, as genocide unfolds before our very eyes in Gaza and Sudan, and with the survivors of genocide and communities who are under siege across the world. As we remember all that we have lost, all of those whom we have lost, and we recognize the survivors, such as my brother, Mr. Christian Phil, and everyone with us today, the young Romani women and men who are here today with us, who are our future, and the crucial work done by Pavi Point, who constantly and tirelessly organize, bring community together, and fight for a better world. We, Roma and travelers in Ireland and across the world, will work to build together, to commemorate together, and to strengthen our solidarity with others who have suffered persecution and discrimination. Because the racism and the hatred of the Holocaust continues today in the rise of the far right here in Europe and across the world. We must commit our memory to those who were murdered, to those who survived, to our ancestors, to our children, and to continue the fight against oppression and against persecution wherever we see it, to build a world that rejects hatred, that fights for justice, and that includes everyone. Thank you so much.